A church is more than a building, and our church's story begins long before a single brick was laid to build this building where we gather each week. You may know that the Church of the Nazarene denomination was officially organized in 1908 in Pilot Point, Texas. But what you may not realize is that 2 years before that date, a man named Mr. Fred Barnes of the Rosedale neighborhood of Kansas City had begun praying that God would start a new church in that sparsely populated area that would be a part of this new holiness movement. He contacted the Reverend D.C. Gamage, and they began to host home prayer meetings, which were well accepted in the community. And from that grassroots movement, a tent meeting gathering was started which held tent meetings for 6 weeks. As the numbers grew and momentum carried on through the next few years, this group met in various buildings and spaces with support from the local Nazarene churches. This group of about 64 charter members were finally able to borrow the money to purchase a small building on State Line Road for $500 in 1930. Under the leadership of Reverend George S. Owen, they were ready to become a fully organized church, even in the midst of the Great Depression. On September 28, 1930, the Kansas City District Superintendent, N.B. Harrell, officially organized the Trinity Church of the Nazarene. At that first worship service, 8 people gave their life to Christ. The congregation, which would someday become Nall Avenue Church of the Nazarene, was born. When Alpen Bose wrote his history of our church in 1980, he described the first 17 years of the life of this congregation as a difficult struggle through the realities of the Great Depression. They struggled to pay their utilities. 5 ministers came and went in that time, and the church building was described as inadequate and poorly located. Yet the notes from their board meetings describe a church that was alive with the Spirit and the presence of God. In 1942, church members canvassed the neighborhood to personally invite their community to a revival. The church prayed and fasted for God's presence and conviction. At the revival, they prayed for the healing of a woman who had not been able to walk. And Bose describes that she was healed in such a significant way that she was able to walk and work for the first time in 4 years after that revival. As a result of this congregational effort and the miraculous work of God, the congregation increased in size, and soon the necessity for a new building was pressing. In 1945, under the leadership of Pastor Frank Harris, a building fund of $1,400 was raised. The parsonage and church building on State Line were sold, making it possible for the church to purchase land at 44th and Rainbow Boulevard. With no building to meet in, construction was started immediately to accommodate the growing congregation. But as the building neared completion, the church received a restraining order from the federal government to stop construction immediately. In this period, shortly after World War II, the use of construction materials was forbidden without special permissions, and the church had been denied the certificate of permission. So, the congregation rented chairs and held their services right in the street, an act which received attention from the local newspapers. Eventually, the Civilian Production Administration, or the CPA, allowed construction on the building to continue, but they refused to allow the building to be used for worship. The building could be used for storage, they said, but the CPA was adamant in their refusal to consider the matter. Pastor Harris, undeterred by this rejection, composed a 3-page letter to President Harry S. Truman, explaining the desperate situation of the congregation. Reverend Harris appealed to the president to relieve this snarled situation and assist us to worship in our building. Through a former business associate of the president, the letter made it to the White House, and a reply was sent from the Oval Office.
Dear Eddie, I appreciated very much your letter of the 9th and from one of the Church of the Nazarene about their building difficulties. I don't know whether we can do anything to help them or not, but I'll look into it. I hope you are well and that everything is going well with you. I also hope I'll have an opportunity to see you when I come out there to vote in November. Remember me to all the gang. Sincerely yours, Harry Truman.
The letter was effective. Before the end of the month, the CPA had lifted the restrictions, and the new building was able to house the congregation for worship. The building on Rainbow was small and unfinished, with bare light bulbs hanging from the unfinished ceiling. But it was the congregation's new church, and they rejoiced in it. The church was renamed the Rainbow Boulevard Church of the Nazarene. The period of time that the congregation spent at the Rainbow location was described as fruitful and exuberant, and the church members were eager to serve and to learn. The church grew in size rapidly, adding many new ministries, including a choir, children's church, caravans, and a visitation program. The church invested in a tape recorder, and the services were taped and delivered to shut-ins. If you're watching this service from home on YouTube, you may appreciate how important that ministry must have been to those unable to attend in person. According to our historian Alpin Bose, even then it was important to our congregation to be a place for seminary students to worship and serve during their time in Kansas City. Bose writes, "The exuberance of our congregation attracted many seminarians to join with us, where they found places of service and added to the effectiveness of our ministry."
He had come to Kansas City for Bob to go to seminary, and we went to First Church. But we had come from a smaller church, and this was too big for us. So we started searching, and we heard about Rainbow Boulevard Church of the Nazarene.
January the 16th in 1970, we had one child. He was a year old at that point. We had moved up from Wichita, and we come up to Kansas City for Ray to start working for the IRS. We looked for a church, a Nazarene church that was close to us, and it was Rainbow Church of the Nazarene was where we decided to attend. One of the questions, though, that we were asked was, are you a seminarian? And there was a lot of seminarians in the church, but we were not seminarians.
Bose describes that the church felt like an extended family. The people worked together as a team, each one filling their own niche. This surely must have contributed to the rapid growth of the congregation, which first doubled and then tripled in size.
Came home for us immediately. We felt at home. Pastor Brother Parrish and Tommy came and visited us after our first Sunday here. And from then on, we were locked in.
Our first Sunday, Leon Harris and his family took us out for lunch. And then several times after that, someone from the church had taken us out for lunch. So it just made it feel more like family.
After graduating from what is now Southern Nazarene University, and we started attending Rainbow in 1964. And then when we moved away for several years to Chicago, and then when I came back with the children, we naturally came to Nall because we had so many dear friends who were here and had been so loving and so thoughtful to us. And I immediately was asked again to be involved in the music program, and it just seemed like home. We still knew so many of the people who attended here, and they were so loving and kind and thoughtful to us. So it just seemed like home all the time that we either attended Rainbow or Nall Avenue.
2 additional churches were planted by the Rainbow Church of the Nazarene, one in Argentine and another in Highland Crest. One of the Rainbow Boulevard members, Art Christie, actually mortgaged his home to provide money to buy materials for the construction of the Highland Crest church building. Even then, we were known as a generous and sacrificing church. When the church had completely outgrown the building on Rainbow, they began to pray and search for a solution. At this time, Johnson County was experiencing its own population boom, and the church leadership was drawn to examine it as a possible location. The 8 acres of land here at Nall Avenue was a possible prospect and seemed like a prime location, but the land was unavailable, and many barriers seemed to stand in the way. But through a series of unlikely events that were no doubt guided by God's hand, the land became available, and the barriers to building on the property were removed one by one. The property was purchased at 1/3 of the appraised value, and later more money was provided after the state of Kansas bought a small sliver of land for $17,000 to widen Nall Avenue. On Palm Sunday, 1971, there was a groundbreaking service for the new church at Nall Avenue. In April of 1972, the congregation voted to call itself Nall Avenue Church of the Nazarene.
I was served on the building committees for both chapel and the second sanctuary, the large sanctuary. I remember when this building, the chapel, was being built, tying rebar down in the lower driveway, brushing on a scaffold the stones in the chapel area.
On October 15th, the congregation met briefly at the Rainbow Boulevard location for the last time, and then a caravan of cars formed and drove to the new building for the first worship service. At that time, the building consisted of one sanctuary with an education wing, which is now the Spanish Service Chapel, offices, and children's wing. This photo directory, printed 1 year after the construction of the building on Nall Avenue, opens with a familiar phrase to those of us who recite our church's identity statement each Sunday morning.
Normally in October, they would have a retreat down at the Lake of the Ozarks, and we would go down there, but we had no place, no relatives to take care of our kids. Well, Betty and Larry would take our boys for the weekend, and then we would wind up babysitting their boys different. We traded off, and that worked really well for us. But by 73, 74, I think we were really involved with the church. The Sunday school class we were involved in had close to 50 people that Dr. Oscar Reed from the seminary taught that for young married couples. And then later, M. Soya had a class that we attended for young couples. But there was always activities that we were involved in with the Sunday school class or couples close to our age. And I think that we just felt that it was home within a few years.
Mm-hmm. Sounds a lot like a family.
Yes.
It's a very close family.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a family because when we had something that we had a problem with, well, there were people to support us. When we needed prayer, they were there.
They're there when we want to celebrate, but they're really there when we need the prayer and support.
There were several families of us who became very, very good friends and have remained so through all of these years. They're still just our dearest friends in all the world. And we have traveled a lot together. We've been to Europe and other countries, and we've taken trips locally here in the States, and we've been together for parties with our children when they were the little children. We had birthday parties and all kinds of Christmas celebrations, Halloween celebrations. Our families were just very, very close and have remained very close through the years.
Not knowing anybody really, when I started coming to the church, the Donna's friends completely accepted both of us. And we were at their homes almost as much as ours.
We first came to Nall in 1975. We being a family of 4, we had 2 boys who were 11 and 14. We found out about Nall from our neighbors who lived a couple of doors up the street from us, Dwayne and Mary Lee Burrows. They had just started coming to Nall. They said that they loved it and they believed that we would really like it too. Nall became home for us almost immediately after we came. I had not been anxious to try it at all because, well, I had grown up in church and always attended church, but I had really, at this point in my life, I had really become disillusioned with church. And so I just was not anxious to try it. But we had these 2 young boys, and I felt like somehow it just wasn't right that they wouldn't be in church. So we came. It was before the sanctuary was built, so they were worshiping in the chapel. And the place was full when we came, and I just realized that not only was it full of people, but God's presence was here. I really felt God's presence. So that's what made me feel at home. There were people testifying about what God was doing in their lives and what He had done in their lives. The prayer time was beautiful. The whole service was beautiful. And our boys they loved it. And they were ministered to. And so we came back. Nall has contributed to us. I think of number 1 importance would be it helped us to raise our family. Our boys grew up here, and I'm so appreciative of that. Other than that, the sermons that we heard, the prayer times that we experienced, the worship, the times of worship were so meaningful and so special that it just became so like home to us. And we made forever friends as well.
These have been just a few of the stories from the first 50 years of our local church's history. There are still many stories to be told, interviews to watch, and old photos to be shared. The story as we've left it here today still has over 40 more years to bring us where we are now. But we have to leave something for next year's homecoming service, don't we? So let me end this video with a call to worship as we gather together for our newest Nall Naz tradition. These are the words of Reverend Bill Coulter's letter to the church over 40 years ago, the day they dedicated this very sanctuary where we worship this morning.
It began in struggle, in times of prayer. It would have never made it without sacrifice directed and sustained by the Lord. It bloomed in miracles. Again and again, great steps were taken which blew the shackles from mere human efforts. The present location and facilities are a testimony to the timing and calling of God. What a privilege so many of us have had in obeying Him and working with Him. It will continue to be a great church, for it is even bigger than any one of us. It will continue to be a place of warmth and love. It will continue to be a place of evangelistic fervor, sending its people out into the highways and hedges and compelling them to come in. It will continue to be a place of discipleship as God's word is proclaimed in its many classrooms. It will continue to be a place of worship and strength and beauty, and will continue to be seen and felt by those joining with us. I'm thrilled to be a part of this great church. Its future is glorious indeed. Bill Coulter.